I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the marble surface, scanning the last page of the itinerary. 3 weeks in Dubai. A $29 million dream stitched together with precision private jet transfers. A penthouse suite on the entire top floor of the Burj Al Arab. 3 chartered yacht cruises, and seats at cultural events even billionaires struggled to access. It was my gift, not just a trip, but a statement of love for Daniel, my only son at 45, who I hoped would finally slow down enough to enjoy time with me. For Elaine, his wife, who'd been a steady companion to him. And for Ruth, my oldest friend, who'd known me since my first day as a hotel manager in Sarasota and had stayed by my side through the loss of my husband. I wanted this to be the kind of memory that would last a lifetime for all of us. That afternoon, I stopped by Daniel's house to drop off a bottle of red I'd found from the year he was born. He and Elaine were out, but they'd given me the spare key. I stepped inside, set the bottle on the counter, and was about to leave when the answering machine blinked. The voice that poured out froze me mid-step. Don't forget. Save me a spot on that Dubai trip. I've already started shopping for gowns. Celeste Harrow, Elaine's mother. I stood there, hand still on my purse strap, my breath tightening. Celeste wasn't on the list. She'd never even been mentioned in my plans. And yet, she spoke as if her seat was already confirmed. I listened to the rest of the message, her laughing about colors that would look perfect against desert sunsets before the beep cut her off. My jaw clenched. I didn't touch the bottle of wine again. The drive home was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. At every red light, my eyes kept darting to the neat stack of printed confirmations on the passenger seat. I thought of the penthouse suites, the private dining menus, the yacht crew that already had our names on file. Celeste's name wasn't there. But if she thought it should be, then somewhere, somehow, Daniel or Elaine had opened a door I never intended. By the time I turned onto my street, my chest felt heavy. The trip was still mine to give, but for the first time, I wondered who would be on the receiving end. The following Sunday, Ruth and I arrived at Bayfront Bistro early, choosing a table on the patio where the breeze off Sarasota Bay softened the Florida heat. I'd invited Daniel and Elaine for a casual brunch, hoping to enjoy a relaxed morning before the trip. Details began consuming everyone's attention. Celeste arrived 20 minutes late, her entrance as deliberate as the dramatic sweep of her pastel silk shawl. Heads turned before she even reached our table. She leaned down to kiss Elaine's cheek, then took the seat directly across from me, positioning herself like a headliner about to take the stage. "Oh, I can't tell you how thrilled I am," she began, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Finally experiencing Dubai like royalty. The Burj Al Arab, the desert galas, those private soirees I've read about for years. I kept my face neutral, but my pulse quickened. She had just listed 2 events I'd booked through personal contacts, details I hadn't shared outside of the reservation team. Ruth's gaze flicked to mine, sharp and questioning. Elaine smiled faintly, her fork poised over a fruit plate. Daniel said nothing, sipping his coffee as though the subject were a weather report. Celeste continued, animated and glowing. "I've already spoken to a designer about my evening gowns. I hear the gold and white ballroom is breathtaking, especially under the chandeliers. It will be my crowning trip before my knees give out." She laughed at her own joke, patting Daniel's hand as if he were the one making her dreams come true. Inside, my mind was sifting through the possibilities. Someone had fed her those details. They weren't guesses, they were too specific, too accurate. I nodded politely, sipping my tea. "It certainly will be memorable," I said, keeping my tone even. the kind I'd perfected during decades of smoothing over high-maintenance hotel guests. Her eyes glimmered, perhaps sensing something beneath my calm. I set my cup down, fingers steady. Though every instinct told me this was no casual brunch conversation, whatever game Celeste thought she was playing, it was becoming clear that she wasn't just a spectator. She was already stepping onto the field. Daniel called 2 days later, his voice warm but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. "Mom, can you come by tomorrow afternoon? I want to talk about the trip." I arrived at his house with a small bag of fresh pastries, expecting a conversation about packing lists or flight preferences. Elaine opened the door, offering a quick smile before retreating to the kitchen. Daniel gestured for me to sit at the dining table. He poured coffee, then cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, maybe Ruth could step aside and let Celeste join us instead. You know, family first." The words landed heavier than I expected. I set my cup down carefully. Ruth has been my friend for over 50 years. She's part of this family in all the ways that matter. And besides, the trip is fully booked, every suite, every seat, every event. They're locked in. Daniel leaned back, drumming his fingers on the table. "You've always been good at moving things around. We'll make it work somehow." There, it was not a suggestion, but a seed planted with the assumption I'd nurture it. I met his eyes. My tone measured. "Daniel, this isn't just about logistics. This is my gift." It was planned with very specific people in mind. Elaine emerged from the kitchen with a tray of mugs, setting one in front of each of us. She didn't look at me, just adjusted the sugar bowl before sitting beside Daniel. He took a slow sip of coffee, the kind that fills a silence on purpose. I just think it would mean a lot to Elaine to have her mother there. I didn't answer that directly. I'd learned over the years that pushing back too soon only gave the other side time to prepare their counter. Instead, I glanced at my watch, made a polite excuse about needing to meet Ruth, and stood to leave on the drive home. The Florida sunlight felt too sharp through the windshield, whatever this was. It wasn't casual. Celeste wasn't just daydreaming her way into Dubai, she had help. And I was beginning to see exactly where it was coming from. It was just after sunset when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sight of Daniel, Elaine, and Celeste on my doorstep felt oddly staged, like the opening to a conversation I hadn't agreed to have. "We thought we'd stop by," Daniel said, stepping inside before I could respond. Elaine followed with a bottle of wine, Celeste gliding in last, her perfume arriving a second ahead of her. I fetched glasses, more out of habit than hospitality. We sat in the living room, the wine breathing on the coffee table between us. Daniel poured, then leaned forward with that forced smile he uses when delivering bad news. "Mom," he began, "we've decided Celeste should take your place on the trip." The words were so casual they might as well have been about changing a dinner reservation. I kept my face still, though my pulse quickened. "You've seen the world," he continued. "Celeste's never left the country. It's her turn." Celeste placed her hand over her heart. "It means so much. Marietta, truly." Her voice dripped with gratitude, but her eyes held the glint of someone who'd already unpacked in her mind. I didn't speak. Years in the hospitality industry had taught me that silence could be more disarming than outrage. Then came the twist, Daniel, with the ease of someone confident in his position, mentioned they'd already told a few mutual friends I wouldn't be going. I lifted my glass, taking a slow sip. My mind, however, was anything but slow. The logistics of the trip ran through my head, the reservations, the contracts, the points of control. All in my name. They thought this was settled. They thought I was out. I set my glass down carefully, meeting Daniel's eyes with a steady calm I knew would unsettle him later. "I see. was all I said. Inside. The decision was already taking shape. I wouldn't fight here. Not tonight. But I would decide exactly how this story would end, and it wouldn't be the version they were expecting. The next morning, I called Ruth. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright as always. But it dimmed quickly as I told her what had happened. "They actually said that you wouldn't be going," she asked. Her tone tight. "Not just said it." I replied, "They've already told people I'm out." Ruth was silent for a beat before speaking again. Her words deliberate. "Marietta, everything is in your name. The flights, the suites, the events. Every single confirmation went through you." I sat back in my chair, her reminder unlocking something in me. She was right. Control wasn't gone. I still held the keys. An idea began to take shape. Sharp and precise. I wouldn't cancel. That would be too obvious. Too easy for them to paint me as the villain. No. I would let them go, just not to the trip they thought they were taking. I pictured it, the $29 million extravaganza pared down to its bare bones. Commercial flights, standard hotel rooms, public tours with long lines, all perfectly functional. Nothing technically wrong, but a far cry from the royal treatment they were expecting. And the savings from those downgrades that would fund my own 3-week escape to the Maldives. Overwater villa, private chef, daily spa treatments, a trip with no one to demand my seat, my patience, or my silence. As the plans settled in, memories rose like old receipts I'd never thrown away covering Daniel's tuition when he fell behind. Helping with a mortgage payment after he mismanaged his business accounts. Loaning him money for emergencies that never saw repayment. Each time, I'd told myself it was what a mother did. Each time, the gratitude faded faster than the ink on the check. This time would be different. I pulled out a notepad and began listing the changes, the ones that wouldn't breach contracts. The ones only I had the authority to make. By the time I set my pen down, the plan wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a schedule, and I intended to keep it. 2 days later, I drove to Tampa to meet with my travel concierge, Clarice, at her glass-walled office overlooking the bay. She had been my partner in assembling every intricate detail of the Dubai trip, from the chartered jet to the midnight yacht dinners. When I told her I needed to make a few adjustments, her brows arched. Adjustments, I slid my notepad across the desk. The private jet will be replaced with commercial flights economy class. Middle seats, if possible. Her eyes widened, but she kept reading. The royal penthouse becomes a standard room at the Gulf View Hotel in Dira. I continued. Close enough to the city, but far from the luxury district. I watched her pen hesitate. "You're serious?" "Very." She scanned the rest of the list. The private yacht dinner, gone. The desert gala, gone. The VIP tickets to the Burj Khalifa's top floor, gone. The personal shopping experience with a celebrity stylist, gone. Clarice looked up, her voice careful. "You know they're going to notice the moment they step into the airport." I let the corner of my mouth lift. "That's the point." She sat back, exhaling slowly, then began typing the changes into her system. As she worked, she tallied the savings. "You're freeing up a considerable amount of the budget." She said, "That's where the Maldives come in." I replied. Clarice stopped typing. "For you," I nodded. "Overwater villa? Private chef? Spa services every day for 3 weeks." Her expression shifted from confusion to a kind of quiet admiration. "I can make that happen." By the time I left, every alteration was in motion. The new Dubai itinerary was stripped of its gloss, while my Maldives booking gleamed like a pearl paid in full by what they no longer had. Driving home, the air smelled sharper, the light clearer. I hadn't taken anything from them they hadn't tried to take from me. Now, all that was left was to wait for departure day, on the morning of their departure. I imagined the scene at Tampa International down to the last detail. Daniel, Elaine, and Celeste, sweeping into the terminal in designer sunglasses and pressed linen, their luggage gleaming with luxury brand tags. I could almost hear Celeste's laugh carrying across the concourse as they made their way toward the first-class lounge, expecting champagne flutes and leather recliners. Instead, somewhere between the security checkpoint and the gate, that expectation shattered. My phone buzzed just as I was pouring my second cup of tea. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I answered on the second ring. "Good morning. Mom? What the hell is going on?" His voice was tight. "Clipped. They're saying our tickets are for economy. Middle row. There has to be some mistake." "There's no mistake," I said evenly. "What, we were supposed to be on the jet. First-class service. Everything. This isn't what you booked." I took a slow sip before answering. "Once a gift is given, it belongs to the receiver. You decided who would go. I decided what kind of trip they'd have." There was a pause, the kind where I could hear him trying to piece together just how much I'd altered. Then his tone shifted from confusion to anger. "You can't just—" "I can." I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "And I already have." Celeste's voice came faintly in the background, sharp and urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. "I'll let you board now," I added, glancing at the clock. "Wouldn't want you to miss your flight." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I set the phone down beside my tea and opened my laptop. My Maldives itinerary was waiting in my inbox. Seaplane transfer confirmed. Villa stocked with fresh fruit and champagne. By the time their plane lifted off for Dubai, I would be boarding mine for the opposite direction, toward quiet waters and air that smelled of salt and nothing else. By the time they landed in Dubai, the fantasy they'd built in their heads had already begun to crack. Celeste called me from the hotel lobby, not to thank me, but to inform me, in a tone halfway between outrage and disbelief, that the suite was nothing more than 2 adjoining standard rooms with views of a concrete parking lot. "It's sweltering here," she said, "and the air conditioning is inconsistent." I could picture her fanning herself with a hotel brochure, the pastel silks from brunch back in Sarasota now sticking to her skin. Elaine's voice chimed in faintly behind her mother's complaints, sharp with irritation. "We've been standing in line for an hour just to get into the museum. No VIP entrance, no guide." I let them speak, offering nothing but polite hums in response. Later that day, I heard from Ruth, who had been following their trip through social media. They posted about trying to get into the desert gala, she said with a chuckle. "Apparently, it's sold out." Of course it was. I'd canceled it myself, along with the private yacht dinner and the Burj Khalifa top-floor sunset. The things they thought were the highlights of their trip were simply gone, and there was nothing they could do to bring them back. Meanwhile, I was settling into the Maldives. The seaplane had landed just as the sun was slipping toward the horizon, painting the water in molten gold. That night, I dined at a table set over turquoise water, the waves lapping gently beneath my feet. The only sound was the soft hum of the ocean, the air warm but forgiving. I took one photograph, the kind you had to look at twice to realize it was real, and posted it with a caption, "Peace is priceless." Then I set my phone face down and returned to my dessert. The quiet was perfect, and I had no intention of letting anything interrupt it. It was just past noon in the Maldives when my phone rang. Elaine's name flashed across the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Her voice was shaky, strained. "Marietta, I can't do this anymore. She's impossible. Every day it's something: the heat, the food, the hotel. She even complains about the sand. I could hear muffled voices in the background, sharp and overlapping. Then the line went quiet. An hour later, a text from Daniel arrived. You were right. No explanation. No flourish, just those 3 words. By the end of the week, the story unfolded. Celeste had decided Dubai wasn't truly Dubai unless she came home draped in couture. She dragged them through boutiques far outside their budget, waving price tags in Daniel's face like a challenge. When he reminded her of their limits, she accused him of embarrassing her in public. Fights broke out in the hotel lobby, on the street. Even during dinner, Elaine admitted she'd started spending more time alone just to avoid the tension. I said little on the phone, letting them talk, letting the weight of their choices settle on them without my commentary. When they returned home, Daniel called and asked to come over. He arrived looking thinner, older, his tan doing nothing to hide the exhaustion in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said as soon as he stepped inside, for letting her push me, for making you feel like you didn't matter. I poured us both coffee and sat across from him, studying the man I had raised. His apology was careful, measured. It was what I'd hoped to hear, but not something I was ready to embrace fully. I listened, nodding occasionally, but kept my hands wrapped around the warm mug instead of offering the reassurance I could see he wanted. Some things couldn't be smoothed over in one afternoon. A few quiet weeks passed before I called Daniel and Elaine, inviting them over for dinner. Ruth joined us too, bringing her famous lemon tart. The air was calm. The table set with my best china, as though nothing had ever fractured between us. We talked about small things at first: the weather, Ruth's garden, a new seafood market that had opened in town. Then, as the plates were cleared, I folded my hands in my lap and looked at them. I wanted to tell you all something important. I began. I've decided I'm not going to fund family extravagance anymore. No more trips just to say we did them. No more luxuries we can't appreciate. Instead, I'm creating something lasting: a travel grant for seniors who've never left the country. It will be named after your father. Elaine blinked, and Daniel's brow furrowed. A travel grant. Yes, I said. Every year, one recipient will have the chance to see the world in a way they never thought possible. All expenses covered. No strings attached. Ruth smiled at me, understanding before the others did. Daniel leaned back in his chair, half curious, half wary. And who's the first recipient? I took a sip of water before answering. Mrs. Albright. She lives 2 doors down from Celeste. Elaine's eyes widened. Daniel froze, remembering the stories how Celeste had laughed at that woman for never going anywhere nice, mocking her thrift store dresses and backyard barbecues. She'll be spending 3 weeks in New Zealand. I continued evenly. Private guides, first-class flights, the works. No one spoke for a long moment. Daniel finally exhaled, his gaze falling to the table. I could see he understood this wasn't spite. It was a statement. Later, after they left, I carried my coffee to the lanai. The night air was warm, carrying the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore. Somewhere out there, a ship's horn sounded, low and steady. I let the breeze brush across my face. Knowing this was more than a win, it was a shift. The balance in our family had changed, and I had no intention of letting it tip back.